Okay, Joshua chapter 22, remember, dealt with the tribes. Joshua had dismissed the 2.5 tribes that were settling on the east side of Jordan. And the rest of the chapter deals with the fact that they built an altar. There was a misunderstanding about that, but they talked about that. They worked that out. Everything was fine. And in chapter 23, at the beginning there, it tells us about how he called the heads or the leaders of the Israelites, and this is the idea of those really 9.5 tribes on the western side of the Jordan, that he's called together and he's giving them some admonitions as they are to settle into the land, as they are to finish taking that land and driving the people out. And so what we want to notice now is verses 12 to 16, where he gives them warnings about failing to keep the will of God as they're in that land. So Joshua 23, let's read 12 to 16. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Ron.
12 through 16, Stephen.
Yes, sir.
Or else, if indeed you go back and cling to the remnant of the nations, these that remain among you, and make marriages with them, and go into them, and they to you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out those nations from before you. But they shall be snares and traps to you, and scourges on your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from the good land which the Lord your God has given you. Behold, this day I am going the way of all the earth, and you know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one thing has failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spoke concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one word of them has failed. Therefore it shall come to pass that as all the good things have come upon you, which the Lord your God promised you, so the Lord will bring upon you all harmful things until he has destroyed you from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. When you have transgressed the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and have gone and served other gods, and bowed down to them, then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and you shall perish quickly from the good land which he has given you.
All right, question number 4 on that sheet I had asked, what would happen if they ignored Joshua's admonition?
Well, God would look upon them as a cursed thing, in a sense, Stephen, and drive them out of the land and remove all of the very good things that he had given to them, and promise them if they maintain themselves in a covenant with him.
Yes. Instead of those blessings, they become a curse and receive the cursings from it. One of the things that strikes me is how time and time again Joshua goes over this. Moses went over all this. Joshua goes over all of this. It helps us to understand we need the repeated admonitions and instructions and warnings and things like that. These people needed it. And you think about it, that this generation was the faithful generation that he's telling these things to. But he mentions there in verse 12, right after he says that they need to love the Lord their God, he says, but if you go back, in other words, if you turn away from that path of serving God, of seeking him, to honor him, and you cling to the remnant of these nations. Now that word cling there is the same word that's used back in Genesis 2:24, where it says, a man shall leave father and mother and cling to or cleave to his wife. In other words, he's saying if you go and you have this close relationship with these nations, you become intimate with them in a sense, then there's going to be a problem here. What's one of the things he warns them about in verse 12?
About marriage to them. And I was thinking about that as you were describing that relationship. Marriage is, as you described, clinging. So, they're marrying themselves as well to these other nations, as well as marrying women of those nations.
Right. So why the warning about marriage to these people? Them marrying these people, them entering into their family, those people are entering into their families, their sons and daughters being married to these peoples of other nations. What's the issue?
The issue is where their affections begin to be directed, and they begin to turn towards idolatry to the affections of those that they marry and cling to. They
Nope.
embrace their way of life.
Okay, embracing their way of life. Anything to add to that? Nancy?
They'll have children, and their children will be taught idolatry.
Okay, so those people who get married, ideally, normally, are going to have offspring. They'll have sons and daughters who will then have parents and who else? Grandparents. What's the relationship between, for those of you who have grandchildren, between grandparents and grandchildren? Is there?
Very close.
Can be very close, very affectionate, right? Can grandparents have a big influence over their grandchildren? They certainly can. Clint?
Basically, I was going to say what Nancy just said, but as you look at it from another perspective, it's a blend of two different cultures. One is God's chosen people, and one is the sinful culture. So which influence is going to win over with the children? And then does that filter up to the parents? Obviously, it did.
Right, right. So you think about these two aspects that have been brought up here. You intermarry, it affects the entire family. It's not just that one person who was an Israelite that married a pagan. The influence doesn't stop there. There's not a little fence around them. You're talking about on both sides, and what we're talking about really is the Israelites and what would happen with them. That Israelite has parents, whether man or woman. It's got a mother and a father, siblings more than likely, aunts and uncles, all of that. And all of us realize that in family, there are things we are affected by. Aunts, uncles, sometimes cousins can impact us. Our children or what our parents are doing, it impacts us. And imagine being married or having a son who's married to a pagan whose father, really, you're supposed to go in and kill. What's that going to do to your son and to your daughter-in-law? When you're supposed to go in and clear out these villages, get rid of the people, drive them out of the land, take their possession. That's going to create issues, right, Mike?
It's also, we need to understand, he's not talking about different races. He's talking about different ideologies of who God is and how he ought to be worshipped, if there even is a God, and which God is. And so these are ideas of cultural differences that you have.
To your point, Ruth was brought in, right? She's integrated into Israel. And if these people would repent and accept the truth of God and his will, that was okay. Now, there are certain ones who are forbidden from entering in, but you get the idea that Ruth was accepted in. Chris?
Solomon comes to mind.
Right.
Everything that he went through. This is warning right here in Valley.
Right. And Solomon's actions, we understand, it destabilized the kingdom. Then you have Rehoboam, Jeroboam, and, just chaos ensuing after that. In this other idea of the culture in general, it's a dilution of the culture of the Israelites. If very many of them intermarry with the pagans around them, it's going to dilute the people of God, their beliefs, their convictions, their practices, just that heritage that's supposed to be passed down through the years. And so it's a real issue, a very real problem. And he says that, look, if that happens, then these people are going to be a pain to you for a very long time. As he says, the scourges are going to be snares, they're going to be traps, they're going to be thorns to you. And that's going to be a persistent, ongoing issue for the nation. And, of course, we have the privilege of fast-forwarding through the book of Judges and seeing that, and even further, really. But you see how that unfolds. Cruz?
It's also a direct sons away from following me, which is basically what Paul refers here in the card said, right? It's the, not that they're a different nation, but it's what they believe in, and ultimately they don't believe in God, right?
Yeah, and to your point, this isn't the first time they've been told this. They've been warned about it. They've been admonished to it. He's reminding them, you're going to go in now, you're going to settle in this land, and there's going to be a temptation that there will be people around you that your sons and daughters will develop relationships with. If you're not doing what you're supposed to do, it's going to end up being an issue. It's going to be a problem. So don't give in to that. So then the Lord, as he tells him and warns him about this through Joshua here, verses 14 to 16, what does he make very clear to them? What does he say, first of all, verse 14, that God has done?
Well, I was going to say, he's mentioning that he is going to go the way of all the earth.
Okay, Joshua's going away
Yes,
of all the earth. Of course, what does that mean, obviously?
dying.
He's going to die, right? We're all going to get there unless the Lord returns first. But yeah, he's going the way of all the, he's not going to be there as a leader to help keep them on track. They are taking on the responsibility.
And then he talks about the faithfulness of God. And God has not failed them in one promise or any of the covenant that he established with the people. He has never failed them.
Exactly. God did exactly what he said he would do. And he's very pointed when he says, all have come to pass, not one word has failed. There's nothing that God failed to do that he said he was going to do for you. Well, then, what does he come back to? Verse 15.
Stephen, can we consider this a prophetic statement?
It is a prophetic statement. Yes.
And so what he is saying is that it's going to be the case that it shall come to pass that all the good things that have come to you upon which the Lord your God promised you, that these things will be removed from you, because there is going to be unfaithfulness.
Yes. Yes. He could see that looking down through time. He saw what was going to happen.
And some of the things that were concerning him also that he speaks about in verse 14 is the promise that was given to Abraham, I'm going to make a mighty nation out of you. And here this mighty nation is, God was talking about them, concerning them. And he hasn't failed even from that promise of Abraham, he hasn't failed.
Right. All down through the centuries, he has worked that out. In spite of all the odds against them, God had worked that out. And he says, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to say, by telling them first how God kept his word, he's telling them again, God is going to keep his word. You've already experienced that. And this is what's going to happen if you do these things. And God will keep his word.
Exactly. God is just as exacting in his wrath as he is in his blessings and his love. That's what Joshua's conveying to them here. Don't kid yourselves. Just as you've come in here, you've seen all these things that God has done, he is going to lower the hammer on you if you don't remain faithful to him. You can count on it. And so this is a very strong and blunt warning to the people. Don't go down that road. And one of the things that jumps out at me, at least in verse 16, when he says, you've gone and you serve these other gods, you bow down to them, the anger of the Lord will burn against you. What does that bring to mind for you? Death? Anything else? Judgment? I think of God in a righteous rage. It's not going to hold back. And he'll wipe them out. And of course, you fast forward far enough, in the history of the Israelites and what unfolds from this point forward. But you get to like the Assyrians, it was brutal what they did to the Israelite people. And then the Babylonians after that, absolutely brutal. You fast forward even more to New Testament times, first century, what the Romans did to the Jews. When God unleashes, when he withdraws that favor, then what happens to people is absolutely terrible. Philip?
It reminds me of when God told Moses to stand aside and let him destroy the people, and he'll make Moses a mighty nation.
Right, exactly. There's a point where God becomes fed up and he says, no more.
Well, and I think we see God's patience in all of this also, because he continues to send people when they do start going astray. He sends prophets. This is going to happen. Remember what happened back? And he continues to send those warnings, those red flags that this is happening.
Yes, and the reason he allows the people to be there, snares and thorns and scourges, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's to, along the way, push them back to God, to realize I need God. Well, let me ask you this. This generation going into this land, realizing the promises that they have known about for decades, that they look forward to in the wandering in the wilderness, some of these people had in their living memory standing there and hearing God speak from Sinai. They had crossed the Red Sea. They had gone across the Jordan. They had conquered all these places, seen all these things. You think about the position of privilege and blessing they had. And Joshua is here telling them, don't go astray. And this is the very next generation afterward we see that issues begin to arise. Well, let me ask you this. Why do you think we forget the blessings of the Lord and slide off into sin, if I could put it this way, relatively easily? Distracted. Okay, distracted with the physical life. Any other thoughts to add to that?
Satan consistently puts stumbling blocks in front of us, and we fall.
He does that. He's always seeking to destroy us. Paul, do you have something?
Well, all sin is not terrible, nasty, and rough. It's a appealing nature of sin to draw people away.
Okay, there's that pleasure that is put before us by Satan to pull us into it, and then it has the consequences afterward. Carrie and then Ron.
I think sometimes when things are going well and life is easy, we can get complacent and kind of go astray.
I think that couples with Anita's, we get distracted. Ron?
I was thinking, as you mentioned, Stephen, the consequences of sin, and you don't necessarily see them. So here we're talking about the marriage. Well, isn't marriage a good thing? Shouldn't people marry? Didn't God say, let's marry? And so you start that path, but you are doing it not as God had defined it.
Okay.
We define it within ourselves what is good.
So let's say that the marriage is the sowing. When does the reaping come?
Yeah, many years after.
Yes. You're going to see it down the road. You're going to see what the day that they're married is not the day that everything blows apart. It's going to be down the road where the issues crop up, especially, and in this case, as we talked about, especially when the children are being raised. You got a pagan mom and an Israelite dad, you got a problem in that household. So, yeah, there's the lack of gratitude. You become complacent because you enjoy these blessings, and that's what he's warning about. You're going to go in that land. I think Moses put it this way. You go in and you're living off the fat of the land. You're going to be tempted to lose focus here. And we do that. When things are going well, we tend to lose focus and realize our need for God. And that's what they do. Caesar.
Satan's strategy is make it normal and goodness do with
Right, yes. Sin's normal and goodness is weird. And he tries to turn our minds around as to what's acceptable and what's not. And so these warnings that are given to them, same types of warnings really for us. Be careful. Things go well, be very careful. Because you'll be tempted to forget about God, lose that gratitude, take his blessings for granted, and turn away from him. Ron.
As you were mentioning previously, Stephen, it's interesting you start referring to these things as snares and traps.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things that are not obvious, are they?
Right.
You want to trap an animal or snare an animal, it's disguised.
Yes.
It's not what you think it is necessarily.
Exactly right. It's going to sneak up on you, but it's going to have you before you realize it. And the pain will be there, and you can't just dismiss it. It's going to happen. Very good. All right, let's jump into Joshua 24 now. Joshua chapter 24. Just notice here, verse 1 says, he gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and called for the elders of Israel, for their heads, for their judges, and for their officers, and they presented themselves before God. If you drop down to verse 26, it talks about Joshua writing these things, the words of the book of the law, and so on. And he puts it where there's a large stone under the oak tree that was there by the sanctuary of the Lord. Remember that we had looked at, they had put the tabernacle at Shiloh, and evidently they've moved it temporarily to Shechem for what unfolds in chapter 24. Now, does anybody remember the significance of Shechem? And I think that's why they're here in Joshua 24. Do you remember where Shechem came up before in the Bible account?
Abraham traveled throughout that area there, specifically a lot of folks from Abraham.
Okay. If you go back to Genesis 12, when Abram first went into the land of Canaan, he was at Shechem or in that vicinity, and that's where he set up an altar to the Lord, and he offered a sacrifice to God. So Abraham is the one who kind of anchored this as this is a holy site. This is a place to worship and honor God. And then in Genesis 33, Joseph bought a plot of ground near Shechem. Remember, it was Shechem where Dinah got into trouble and all of that, the city of Shechem, and named after the chief guy there, Shechem. So a man in the city named the same. But Jacob, when he settled in there for at least a time, he built an altar there that he called El Elohi, and that means God, the God of Israel. It's a place where when the children of Israel, after they conquered Jericho and Ai, this is the area of Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim or Gerizim. And that's where the blessings and cursings were announced by the people. So this has a very deep history with Israel, starting with Abraham on down. And they're gathered here for this occasion as Joshua gives admonitions to the tribes before his passing. All right, so let's read here verses 2 through 13 and grab the first part of his admonitions. So Joshua 24, 2 to 13. Who's got that? Jim?
And Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord God of Israel, your fathers in living Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, dwelt on the other side of the river in old times, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from the other side of the river, led him throughout all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants, and gave him Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave the mountains of Seir to possess. But Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. I also sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt, according to what I did among them. Afterward I brought you out. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. So they cried out to the Lord, and he put darkness between and your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Then you dwelt in the wilderness a long time, and I brought you into the land of the Amorites, and I dwelt on the other side of the Jordan. And they fought with you, but I gave them into your hand, that you might possess the land, their land, and I destroyed them before you. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose to make war against Israel, and sent and called Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam. Therefore he continued to bless you. So I delivered you out of his hand. Then you went into the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you. Also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I delivered them into your hand. I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you. Also the two kings of the Amorites, but not with your sword nor with your bow. I have given you a land for which you did not labor, and cities for which you did not build, and you dwell in them. You eat in the vineyards and the olive groves which you did not plant.
Okay, question number 5 I'd ask, list 2 to 3 things the Lord did for his people in this section here. So just a few things, maybe something that jumps out to you.
He delivered them out of the land of Egypt, out of captivity.
Okay, down there in slavery, oppression, misery, he brought them out of there. Yeah, what a great and wonderful blessing.
He's also talking to a people who would prepare for those things. This isn't far removed, or that some of them were children when that happened.
Right, yeah, it would be in their living memory, no doubt. I'm not sure how anyone could ever forget crossing the Red Sea. I just, that. Anything else? Carrie?
He gave them cities that were already established, gardens, to live their needs.
They just, everything's set up and good to go. They don't have to go out and start a vineyard from scratch and wait years before it actually produces anything. It's there. It's ready. They don't have to dig the wells, which, by the way, extremely important, very vital, and very difficult to do. It's bad rocky ground over there.
He gave them victory over their adversaries, but also he reminded them that even though Balak, he was not through Balaam cursing him, he gave Balak counsel, and unfortunately they followed the counsel that was given and were led into sin.
Right. He took what man intended to be a cursing, turned it to a blessing, but then, of course, they went with the sinful influence and temptations there. What's the very first thing he mentions? Really, verses 2 and 3.
He says, I took your fathers who were beyond the top of your phrases there, and I took one of them out, and that is Abraham. And they worshipped other gods. And I took Abraham out, and I showed them a better way.
They were pagans. And I brought him out. I called Abraham. Abraham responded to that call. And that's why you believe in the one true God. That's why you have a relationship with me all the way back. So he's helping them to see not just the blessings that God had given to them specifically in their lifetime, but he says, you go all the way back. Look at this heritage that you have and how you are blessed above all the peoples of the earth. Christians are blessed above all the peoples of the earth. It's not just what we have and enjoy in our lifetime, but there have been those who have gone before us that have understood the truth, have lived that truth, and helped to pass that down to us. And we have a heritage in that sense. We need to appreciate that fact and not think, well, we're the first generation ever to know or understand these things. We need to know that history to understand that. And all of us could probably point to people in our personal lives who taught us, whether it was parents, aunts, uncles, spouses. Somebody along the way taught us and shared the faith with us. And that's such a great blessing. And we need to carry on that heritage, of course. Any other thoughts there?
It's just, amazing to me that when you think about it, in regards to this, God continues to take people out of sin, out of darkness. He did for Noah, he did Abraham, he did these people that took out of Egypt, so he continues to do that with people who truly want to show the love towards him.
Yes, absolutely. Continues to do it. That great continuing love of God. All right, let's read verses 14 and 15 here, please. 14 and 15. Who's got this? Carter?
Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord.
All right. So he lays down that admonition and gives them that choice that's before them. Anything here surprise you? Tell you, I'm surprised in verse 14 when he says, put away the gods. There's evidently still some idolatry among them that they've not fully let go of yet. And he's telling them, you got to get rid of that. You got to get rid of it completely. Now, whether it's people consciously, positively, if you will, actively pursuing idols, or whether it's a case of like, remember when Jacob and Leah, Rachel, all them escaped, Rachel took the household idols with her, and maybe this is just kind of things they're carrying along with him. He says, look, those things you got to get rid of. Just like Jacob and Rachel, they buried them and got rid of them. Said, we're not carrying these things with us anymore.
It also doesn't matter where the idols come from. If they're from your fathers, if they're from Egypt, if they're from this land, get rid of them all.
Good point. Exactly right. So Joshua lays it out. Look, you have a choice. You make that choice. Me, my house, we're going with God, serving him. Any other thoughts? Clint?
Just that this applies to us today. We have the choice to serve God or to not. And each one of us will make that decision and will be judged for it.
Absolutely. Still have that choice today. Who will read 16 to 28 for us? Joshua, 24, 16 down through 28. A little bit longer reading there. Go ahead, Philip.
So the people answered and said, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. The Lord is our God. For the Lord our God is he who brought us and our fathers out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Who did those great signs in our sight, and preserved us in all the way that we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out from before us all the people, including the Amorites who dwelt in the land. We also will serve the Lord, for he is our God. But Joshua said to the people, you cannot serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions, nor your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do harm and consume you after he has done you good. And the people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve the Lord. So Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen the Lord for yourselves to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. Now therefore, he said, put away the foreign gods which are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. Then Joshua wrote these words in presented up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. And Joshua said to all the people, Behold, this stone shall be a witness to us, for it has heard all the words of the Lord which he spoke to us. It shall therefore be a witness to you, lest you deny your God. So Joshua let the people depart, each to his own inheritance.
All right, so question number 6, I had asked, what was the purpose Joshua went through this history? The history that he had reviewed previous to this. In this section, we learn why. So why did he do that? What does he drive to in his speaking to them, laying out the choice between them?
Well, prior to his death, he's setting forth this admonition to them to recognize the nature of God, that not only is God a loving God, but he is a jealous God, and as we know, can consume things through his desire with fire or however he chooses to remove them. So it is his plea and his earnest desire that they would remain faithful unto God and not be a recipient of the curse that could come upon them through their disobedience.
Yes. Yes, he's giving those admonitions and those warnings. Any other thoughts to add to that? Verse 25, what does he say? Or what is stated there?
He is establishing a covenant with them.
Okay.
So we see that there are multiple covenants that they are to recognize and to observe. And as we know, covenant breakers will not inherit the kingdom of God.
Right.
Physically or spiritually.
Right. And here, Joshua's not making a new law for them. It's not like there's a law of Joshua here, because he specifically says the book of the law of God. He wrote these words in the book of the law of God. It's not him making anew the law of Joshua. He's just simply reiterating the principles and points from the law of Moses that have been given. And with this generation, and they've done this a few times, but essentially they're renewing that covenant with God. They are themselves affirming and positively saying, we're going to serve him. And that's why he's gone through all of this, to remind them. And so it's just it's an idea of recommitting their lives, reaffirming that commitment to the Lord. And that's good. That's good for them to do that. And in their lives, in our lives, time to time, we reaffirm we're committed to God. We're doing his will. We're going to serve him. We're not going to serve other gods. Cruz?
Well, when I was reading this, Joshua was not trying to discourage their faith. But what he was hoping was to discourage like this whole superficial commitment. This, yes, we will serve them, but removing the but, right, and emphasizing that their God is a jealous God, etc. Right. So to your point, reestablishing that covenant and reminding them of, God does not tolerate disobedience.
Yes, he's trying to sober their thinking. You need to be clear about what you're committing to here. And to that point, he said the people respond when he presents that challenge to them, choose who you're going to serve. Well, far be it from us that we should forsake God. Lord's our God. He brought us out of Egypt, and so on and so forth. And so Joshua, in verse 19, tells them what? He's holy. You cannot serve him. Verse 20, if you forsake the Lord and serve these foreign gods, you have to commit, and they did commit to serving God, and understand that the Lord is holy, and you can't have any unholiness in you and think that you're going to be serving God. You have to remain true and pure and devoted to him. There's no compromise here.
I think that, Joshua specifically, because he was there when the covenant was first established with Moses, and how quickly those people broke that covenant. And so
40 days up on the mountain.
Exactly. And that's all it took. And Joshua's there. He saw that. So here he is saying, okay, you were the children of these people. It's time for you to commit to this now. You saw what happened to your fathers while wandering in the wilderness because they broke the covenant. And he goes on to talk to them. So this is the second time that Joshua's got to see a nation commit to a covenant with God.
Yes. And the people come back with him when he pushes back on them and basically says, you need to know exactly what you're committing to here. And they come back in verse 21, no, but we will serve the Lord. Okay, you're witnesses. You stated you're witnesses against yourselves that you have committed to this. And they come back again in 24, the Lord our God we will serve, and his voice we will obey. So they have reaffirmed time and again, we're committed, we're committed, we're committed. Okay, we're going to set this up as a memorial stone. We're going to put it there. That stone is a witness against you. Just something that's going to remind us of this agreement that was made today, of this commitment that you did. Now, I want to think about this for just a moment. Joshua's leadership. What kind of leader was Joshua? When you think about him leading these people, he did a great deal of military work. He was a commander. He was out there on the battlefield with his people. So that started all the way back in the book of Exodus. He was General Joshua, if you will. And so that's come all the way down through. But how does he lead these people? He's military, yes, but
he's also a follower of that law. He's an example of how that law ought to be followed and the passion that it takes and the love that it takes of God's law in order to bring about these things.
okay. First and foremost, above anything, he himself is committed to the law of God. He took seriously the admonition, and he was serious about it before, but when the Lord, when he came to the leadership position after the death of Moses, be strong and very courageous, do all the words of this law, don't depart to the right hand or to the left hand, he took that seriously. And so he maintained that course. First of all is his devotion to the Lord. And then being with those people, shoulder to shoulder, going into that land, he proved his mettle, if you will. He wasn't just, hey, you guys go do it. He was out there with them. And the other thing that I think it's worth noting is he has moral suasion here. He's talked to them multiple times, but he's appealing to them to do the right thing. He's not really a judge of the people. He's certainly not a king. He's not a lawgiver. But he has moral suasion with the people. And he was effective in this only because the people, generally speaking, were receptive to that truth. You can't lead people that don't want to be led. These people were willing to listen, to heed, to follow, to go into the land, to go into danger, to do all those things. So they had a great respect for Joshua and his role. And that goes all the way back to the beginning when Reuben, Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh told him, be strong, we're with you, we're in it. Chris.
He was a man of great faith. He, no doubt, whatever God told him needed to be done, okay, we're going to do it. And that's just pure faith in God. That's the way.
Yes, exactly. Ron and Cruz.
He was a man of great integrity, as we're describing throughout his life. There was no ambiguity with him. He spoke with great clarity, and just as we are noting here, this covenant, he reminds them that it's comprised of statutes, ordinances, laws, and commandments, and they are to follow those. So he is a leader of clarity that he declares to them.
Yes, exactly. Cruz?
Yeah, I just, going back to what we just read, here, he almost, when I read it, I see him as an inspired messenger of God. Really just going back to his history, being a military leader, leading by example. Here, I know we don't think of him as a prophet, but almost, the way he carries himself here, really just almost as a messenger of God. with reestablishing the covenant, right?
Right. He's definitely delivering God's will to them, reiterating that to them, making it very plain, very clear. And being in his position, he needed to do that. And the influence that he had among this generation. I mean, you think about how they would view this man. This is one of two men who survived the wilderness. And he was the right-hand man of Moses. He was the hand-picked successor, hand-picked by God. And he's been with us. And we remember, as it goes on to tell us here, that he died being 110 years old. So when he's giving this admonition, I don't know if he's 95, if he's 100, if he's 105. But they completely respected Joshua. And that's because of all that history that he had. And therefore, he was effective in leading the people. So it goes on. We're not going to cover this just for the sake of time, but it goes on to tell us about the death of Joshua. We're going to read about that again over in Joshua chapter 2. There's some overlap, and just keep that in mind when you get into the book of Judges. There's some overlap between the accounts that are written here. And it talks about Eleazar and how that he ended up dying. But there's something else there in verse 32. It mentions something else, and what is that? Okay, when it says bones of Joseph, let's remember it's not just the bones. Why was it? It's really just talking about his dead body, and why is that? Yes, he was embalmed, not embalmed, but mummified, yes. He was mummified in the Egyptian manner because he was, ruler in Egypt, and he had said, you take my bones up, and that's what they did. They took him up, and they buried him there. But what that helps to remind us in the narrative here is connecting it all the way back to all those years ago when God's people first went down into Egypt and the history with everything that had unfolded. So, all right, any other thoughts? Lord willing, let's move into Judges next week, Judges 1 and 2.